Why is this one of your favorite books ever? And why am I holding it up in this interview with you?
Because, well, several reasons. The first being that it is a really important book that looks at vocalizing anger, hurt, fear, um, using the voice as a tool for therapy.
Correct me if I'm kind of summarizing Yanov's theory differently than you understand that, but if the grown-up child, if the adult is given a container within which they can re-experience that same pain of the child and complete the process and realize I didn't receive the love that I am worthy of receiving. So with the combination of that recognition, I am worthy of love, and I'm experiencing pain because I wasn't given the love that I am worthy of, combined with being back in that same emotional state and crying. That is the key, according to this theory, to healing.
Well, I think you nailed it. I mean, I think that's the basis of Janov.
I've been reading this book called The New Primal Scream.
Oh, yeah, I haven't seen that yet.
Which
What do you think?
It's quite interesting. This comes out in 1991. By this point, Janov is quite critical of some people who have taken ideas from the original book, and he thinks in a kind of unscientific, unauthorized way are doing all kinds of wrong things. There's no way in which this evolved, official account of, what primal scream therapy is, would consistently condone everything that's happening in the record. But I prefer the record to the theory. Okay, so
I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, of course.
It's interesting charting the development of Tears for Fears. 1970 is when the original Primal Scream book comes out. 1983 is when The Hurting comes out. 1991 is when this later Janov book comes out. And in the meantime, Roland and Kurt end up going for a meal with Janov.
Yes, I think I heard something about this.
He comes to one of their shows, and then they go for a meal, and we're talking about this after the fact in later interviews. Apparently, the vast majority of the time at the meal is Janov trying to persuade them to make a musical, to make a Primal Scream musical.
I don't think I heard that part of it.
There's an interview with Roland.
I remember reading that they went to dinner, but and there was a big discussion, but I'm not sure what happened.
That they have this personal encounter with Janov, and it's by all accounts it seems like it's a little bit off. There's they don't get on with him. They certainly they reference the difficulty of meeting your hero.
Of course, yeah, no. But Songs from the Big Chair is The Hurting and Songs from the Big Chair. If you think of Shout, for example, their biggest hit from that period, I mean, it's 100% Janov inspired. So, but that adage of never meet your heroes?
This is an especially interesting instance of that, because not only is he the hero that influences them, it's quite different from if it were a purely musical influence. Here, this is the person who created the therapy, the form of therapy that they've been going through, that they've been finding healing to some extent. An aspect of this book that I am a little bit resistant to is there's a whole chapter on normal, obviously on what it is to be normal. On the nature of
what is that anyway?
According to Janov, normal means that all systems are functioning as they were intended. So, and this relates to the thing that I do like about the Primal Scream, which is that it relates to equanimity and the functioning of the body. And he's talking about the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system in a way which
The nervous system, for sure. Yeah.
yeah, which kind of parallels, work on trauma in Bessel van der Kolk and others who I'm, very influenced by. And he's focusing on the 3 different parts of the brain in a way that kind of relates to the work of Peter Levine on trauma, which really influences me too. So he's highlighting that we can measure whether someone is in good health by whether their systems are functioning. And then he's claiming that he has all the scientific data, heart rate changes, all of these physiological changes happen when someone goes through the primal scream therapy. Well, then he ends up with these criteria for what's normal. And then based on those physiological findings, which he's then using to prove like he's got the one solution to healing.
I think that he definitely stumbled onto something. I know that in the therapy world, not everyone condones his methods for various reasons. Like, again, myself, I see value in some of what he's saying, especially for someone like me who's like a very verbal, physical person, doing a physical activity, or as Tears for Fears would put it, shouting it out. For me, like, that does help me, but it's not going to help everybody. I think for anyone, any therapist ever to say, oh, I've got the complete solution. No, it's not the same for everybody. Certain types of therapy help other people more than others.
So for me, this is where it gets really interesting, because we have a case in point of a whole system of therapy developing, which helps various people, some of whom are musicians. But then once the person who is responsible for creating that theory is trying to make it be an official system,
Trying to control it, really.
Yeah, which
for good reasons. In some respects, for good reasons, because it can be dangerous if it's not done with a practitioner,
But there's also, on the other hand, something dangerous about, the position that he ends up at. He'll say being loved is normal because it allows the system to be normal. On the one hand, we can see the good in that. If we study how the human organism is responding when it doesn't receive love, there's like, this is what the heart rate is. This is, there are these other measurements that we can take, and we can use that data to show that things should be different. So there's something good to that. But then on the other hand, he then ends up with this really fixed idea of what the body should be like for it to be normal. And he ends up saying things like, self-love is not normal. Normal people don't love themselves. They just live. And
is that true? Because I have never met anyone who hasn't had at least some kind of self-doubt or hatred on some level.
So I think it is the case that people in general have trouble loving ourselves, definitely. But by this point, he's got the ideal of the normal person. If you go through primal therapy, then you will become normal because your body will stabilize. All the systems will be functioning like they're supposed to. And then you won't love yourself. And that will be good.
You mean that you will love yourself?
That you won't. He says normal people who have, like, the person who's been through primal scream therapy and is cured and is now normal, doesn't love themselves. And what he means by that, he says they just live and they don't consider whether they love themselves or not. He gets this really fixed idea of what the normal person is like. And this normal person would not make music like Shadows and Sand and would not make music like the Tears for Fears records. And that music, for me, is so healing and important, what it's doing with pain. And especially in the song Tears Are Holy, and the kind of religious lexicon there, sanctify the imagery of baptism as well.
Mhm.
Even for me, it's so interesting that there's something powerful in that song, which is to some extent uh, the most Yanov influenced because it's
Mhm.
celebrating crying.
Mhm.
That is very far away from what he is celebrating as, what the person who's cured should be like.
Mhm.
And I like his theory doesn't value and honor this kind of expression.
Mhm.
And so it's all the more important for us to somehow, I feel. Does that make sense?
To me, it sounds like a combination of so many people adopted this theory and method, and it really worked and helped so many people. I mean, honestly, it did. If you look at like the statistics and the results, like you can find results all over the place if you Google. He had such a high success rate initially, and I think it did help so many people. But then these people, like say John Lennon, was never trained to be a primal scream practitioner. Tears for Fears never trained and did the thing to do that. The thing about the musical that doesn't even fit what he's talking about in that 1991 book, but maybe it's because they opted to not do a musical around it. Maybe,
Something
maybe
else
he
that
disagrees with this. Maybe he felt sour about that, and maybe he himself was upset by that.
became more
You know,
anti-art, perhaps.
because here he is, he's the person who founded this thing that like they were like on about and had hits about, and like they're not even seemingly willing to like make something bigger out of it that could actually maybe he thought would help people more. Again, I'm not Yanov, certainly not Yanov.
Yeah,
He
and I
came up
think
with
that's
some
great.
really cool
I'm
ideas.
glad that that you created this music that was influenced by him, and that your encounter with the Primal
A lot of
Scream
us have
book
been.
was a catalyst that led to this record. But I'm also extremely glad that you're not Yana.
I think his contribution to humanity is much larger than mine will ever be. I'll just say that, and that I respect him. And I need to read the book. I can't really comment because I haven't read the book. So I'm not really educated enough to comment about that right now.
Yeah,
But from what I understand and from the story you just told me, it's like, what is even going on? I think Yanov needs therapy for probably having become like such a household name. He's probably traumatized. Like I've seen so many people traumatized and their lives completely turned upside down by becoming like a public figure.
you brought my attention to this other book, Emotional Agility,
Yes,
which I recommend to
Susan
anyone.
David.
And that in turn is very influenced. I've just got loads of books there.
I
By
love
Man's
her.
Search for Meaning. Are you familiar with this book, Viktor
Which one
Frankl,
is that?
Man's Search for Meaning? She references
You've told me
Frankl
about
a lot.
Frankel, and I've actually wanted to read that for a long time, but I haven't yet.
And
It's on my hit list, though, for
he in
sure.
turn is really influenced by Spinoza.
Yes.
So theoretically, for me, it's interesting to be aware of all of these different systems, all claiming to, and to different degrees, facilitating transitions to greater health. But they're at odds with one another.
Yes.
And there are some unhealthy components of some of them, and especially in this fully evolved Yanov. Let's bring two last passages of it into play,
Okay.
and then circle back to the record to close. So the first of these two last passages from Yanov involves E.T., the film E.T. And so he says, when we watch a film in which two struggling people finally embrace, why do we cry? Because it represents a deep longing in us that is finally realized. We cry for our own needs on the screen. So, I like that bit. The chapter on the role of weeping in psychotherapy is the one where he's using the most reference to art, but then there's also the anti-art component is strongest too. So it starts with a quotation from Tennyson, the poet. The epigraph is, "Tears from the depths of divine despair rise to the heart and gather to the eyes, in gazing on the happy autumn fields, in thinking of the days that are no more." And for me, that Tennyson passage kind of resonated with "Tears are holy," that you have a work of art that you've created, which is honoring the holiness of tears, tears from the depths of divine despair.
Mhm.
And then
Well, I
there
mean,
were
they were created for a reason. I mean, we were made with them. And I think there's just so much crap out there that's like, oh, especially for men, it's like, oh, don't bother
oh yeah,
crying. Don't
yep.
cry. You're a man. Pull it together. And I just think
Mm,
that there's this like a stereotype that, oh, crying is bad. Being angry is so bad. But like, these are normal feelings. And this is, I think, part of why I found Susan David's work
yeah,
so normalizing,
yeah.
because it's like, no, we're all human. We all are going to cry. We all are going to be angry. Are you mad at work? Good. That's like a direct Susan David quote. And I was like, that's genius, actually, because there is a segment of society that thinks it's not okay to have feelings, especially in the Western world.
Yeah.
If I had to recommend whether people read Primal Scream or Emotional Agility, I bet you know which one I would recommend more.
Emotional agility.
That.
I would, yes, okay. Both Calders recommend emotional agility above the primal.
Yes, I mean, I think Primal Scream is valuable. I think that type of therapy is valuable. But I think if you really want to like get a clue about how to like conduct yourself, if you are an emotional person in a society that tells you no, that's not okay. And as you know, I mean, I'm one of those people that I feel very deeply about things, and no one ever in my life told me that was okay. Like it took reading a book by a stranger to go, oh my God, maybe I'm not a freak.
And she speaks very well about blame and shame.
Yes.
The non-acceptance of of parts of oneself. And that the only way to health, this is so different from what's happening in this later alphabet.
Yes, 100%.
The only way to health is to show up for oneself, to accept how one feels, all the different aspects of oneself, and to have just the right level of agility to see, which is difficult.
Yes.
What is?
You have to learn to step back.
Yeah, step back. And
like
then,
that is the number one thing, the number one takeaway I got from that book is that you have to learn to understand. She says this very succinctly. Feelings are data, not directives. And no one, I think for much of my generation, no one ever taught us that.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
I'm not saying Susan David has all the answers. Mr. Yanov has all the answers. But I think if you read through, you'll find bits and pieces in each that will help you. It is so important that we all stop pretending everything's fine. You remember that song from like, I think this is like the mid-90s? Everything's fine. You know, it's like a girl screaming, saying all the things to her mom that she really wants to say, what life outside of, you know, being a young adult woman on your own, you know, and she's not having a good time of it. And like, yet she's insisting to her mother on the phone that everything's fine, but it's not. And she's discovered that like real life is not always okay. That was voiced a lot in the 90s. Like think about Nirvana and their output. And if you think about, I mean, the whole, what is often referred to as Kinderhorror, that whole genre, or Riot Girl, it's all expressions of rage. It's like popular, poppy expressions of rage. But it is what it is.
Because it's relatable. Yeah, there is.
Yeah, like that's still, we can see that it is acceptable to express emotion in society. And that many people have done it with music, but they all approach it differently. And, you know, you can't like take the rage out of Nirvana, can you? I guess like if I had to wrap it up, I would say everyone read Susan David, and also don't behave.
Yes.
Don't behave.
Less shoulding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't pretend. I mean, do use decorum and have diplomacy, and do try to, as she recommends, you know, step back and realize that whatever you're feeling isn't necessarily true. It's your feeling only. There might be other perspectives, and just to consider that that's just maybe one element of a bigger picture.
Yeah,
that's the hardest part I think for a lot of us is like, you know, when you're feeling things, they feel like they're happening and this is what's happening and it's real, but they're feelings can change, and opinions can change.
We all have to change, which is
Hey, good one.
final song. But I think that now, from your current perspective, there's a little bit less have to change, because we all have to change. Is kind of suggesting there's a problem.
Change is the fact of life.
Yeah, but I feel like if you were to be writing a closing track for this EP now, it would be of that nature, but the Susan David inspired version, I think, would be slightly more of a sense of, yes, we have to change, but we only change through making these refinements, these small refinements to align one's the habits, the behaviors that one's with one's chosen values, and the values that those choice moments when one realizes, does this align with what
I mean, I think that song would probably stay the same.
Good.
Change is such a part of life, and I mean, gosh, it's the only constant that we're all guaranteed of. I mean, that's just the way things are, isn't it?
The paradox.
Change is the one thing you can rely on.
I love the paradox that the song wouldn't.
It's a paradox, but
the song change wouldn't change after.
I don't think it would.
Yeah,
because I mean, it's that was almost written separately at a point where I sort of mostly made peace with the things I was struggling with when I first started writing that record.
Yeah,
like I feel like, I did get, it took a few years, but it did get to the point where we finished that record, and that was like the last thing that I had to say about it, and I think if I had to track list that record now, and add back the scream and all that there, then that would definitely be the last song.
Yeah.
That would be the closer, period. I was always very confused about whether to put that or Angels Are Everywhere. Because Angels Are Everywhere just feels like the prologue. You know what I mean?
No, I do think I think it ends so well. And I'm just kind of recognizing, though, that there is the wonderful Susan James kind of paradox to, we all have to change, we can't stay the same. There's a level on which there's more acceptance now. There's more acceptance in that song than there is in the other songs. And I think that there's even more acceptance now. Let's close with the image from the very opening pages of Susan David's book, because it's nautical. There's a ship and a lighthouse.
Yes, there is. Isn't that funny?
So we're going to, exactly. It's very funny. So we're going to create this alternative ending where the Titanic
gets home
to New York. I'm sure you remember these opening pages from Susan David's book.
And I mean, I got captured right away with the whole story about the captain, the sea captain. I was like,
of HMS Defiance.
Who are you? Why are you in my head?
Yeah, because Defiance is good. And I've always thought that you were a very defiant person. Defiance is good. So here we have a ship, the HMS Defiant. It's actually called the HMS Defiant.
Literally.
It's on a collision course. The idea of being on a collision course, I think, is crucial for the book. And the Defiant captain of the ship Defiant is insisting that the other entity, the other ship, changes course. But of course, it turns out to be a lighthouse. The reason why that is both like beyond being kind of a fun opening page story, the lighthouse is like the beacon, is like the emotion. And the light, like a lighthouse, the emotion, say our anger, has a message that it's trying to communicate to us, and it's serving us very well. If we would only treat it as a lighthouse, with a beacon, with a message. The message is something along the lines of, my boundaries aren't being respected, something that does not align with my value of respect is at play just here. And so I think it's just so beautiful that this very powerful bestseller, Emotional Agility,
Mhm.
opens just literally a one-page story about the encounter of a ship with a lighthouse, and that this is the way in which, you know, we can't stay the same. We can't continue being the Titanics that are
Mhm.
sinking, causing
Mhm.
each other to sink. But the clue, the solution has been there all along. We have to recognize the
The
lighthouse
lighthouse.
as a lighthouse. And it's
That.
there. There is a solution. So thank you for being a lighthouse of sorts, directing us towards
Aw.
safety of emotional
Ship's captain at
agility.
your service.
Yeah.
Hopefully I don't crash the boat.
Thank you for being at once defiant and also a beacon,
Thank you.
lighthouse beacon.
Well,
And
likewise.
great.
And yeah, I'm so glad you got the book and that you read it. And I think, you know, it's probably one of the most helpful books about healing that I've read
Yeah.
in this century.
Yeah. It unites aspects of so many other works that I am very influenced by. The aspect of Spinoza that I think is healthy gets in via Frankl. The whole idea of
Yes.
the pause before reacting to a stimulus from Frankl. That is way back, you know, from Spinoza. Spinoza's so much in Frankl.
She really nailed it, and she kind of like brought something to everyone's attention that I think the Western world wasn't really taking into account before.
Yeah, it's a very powerful, succinct bringing together of two components that I think are crucial. On the one hand, this capacity to have some distance, to cultivate the distance from the awareness of one's habitual pattern and habit, habitual way of responding to a stimulus, awareness of that mechanism combined, second component, with appreciation of the emotions as gifts to us, as valuable, not
Yes.
just as these unthinking, irrational things that need to be controlled. And it's a really powerful, succinct bringing together of those two those two ingredients that you're right, not very many other people are bringing those two ingredients.
Yeah, it's like there's always been something at war with itself in all therapies that I've found, or most therapists. There's like so much of this makes sense, so much of that makes sense, but really, like, to integrate all these things, it is much more inclusive, I think, than a lot of the other types of therapies and things that I've come across. So
yeah, it's more inclusive, more holistic. It coheres more with your music, ultimately, I think, than the Primal Scream does in an interesting way. And speaking of your music, we should highlight that, of course, you do have a new song, Cracks, out with your new project, The Red Hour. And there will be a full record.
The Red Hour is really a marriage of theater. It's kind of a marriage of what my music used to be like when I was so enveloped in persona. There's elements of that as well, but it's also me just working through some things. And I may not be as direct about what they are in that project, but it's me working through a plethora of things. Some are veiled in metaphor, some are not. And so, I mean, I continue to try to make music now where I am working through things, and where hopefully other people who are working through similar things or faced with similar difficulties, hopefully they find it through a friend, or a friend tells a friend, and maybe it helps them too. I mean, that's why I'm here, right?
Yeah. So I would love to talk about The Red Hour when you do put that EP out. The lyric, of course.
Talk again.
Yeah. The lyric in Cracks is the cracks are beginning to show. And I think it works so well as a first song for that project. It's the beginning of something. And it's the beginning that recognizes the fragmentation, but there's a knowing. So just like in Susan,
and it's what's happening in our society right now. I mean, over the last year, our society broke.
That knowing of the cracks beginning to show is again that observing with some distance. That is that component.
Yes.
and it will be
Yes.
united with a celebration and an honoring of the emotions, I feel. It already is in that song Cracks, and I'm excited to see how these two different ingredients show up
Yeah.
in the record, in your new music.